What's up, guys? I'm DK, and you're watching Pro Wrestling What If, the series where I look at the different what if scenarios as terms of the world that we call professional wrestling. In 2009, Edge had formed a tag team with Chris Jericho after Edge finished up a world championship feud, and Chris Jericho had just finished a reign as Intercontinental Champion. They would go on to win the Unified Tag Team Championships by being inserted into a match with the Colognes and the Legacy at the Bash 2009. However, the tag team would be short-lived as Edge would injure his Achilles tendon on July 3rd, 2009 at a live event against Jeff Hardy, leading to Chris Jericho mocking Edge for being injury-prone and replacing him with Big Show to keep the tag team championships. Edge was expected to be out of action for up to 1 year, but returned in 6 months as the 29th entrant in the 2010 Royal Rumble match and would go on to win it. Chris Jericho would win the World Heavyweight Championship at Elimination Chamber, and Edge would go on to choose Chris Jericho as his championship match at WrestleMania 26, officially beginning the one-on-one feud between the two. So that's going to be the topic of today's video. We're talking about what if Edge didn't return at Royal Rumble 2010. Now, I know when regarding Edge and a Royal Rumble return, we always go back and talk about the 2020 return, but I feel like a lot of people forgot how shocking it still was when Edge actually came back during the 2010 Royal Rumble and won it, considering we can't really imagine a world where anyone else but Edge possibly would win that Royal Rumble. And if you end up enjoying this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share this to all your friends, subscribe, and press the notification bell for when future episodes get released, and leave a comment down below about today's topic or suggesting a future topic for an episode of Pro Wrestling What If. So we're going to be beginning this, of course, at Royal Rumble 2010, because of the fact that if Edge doesn't return at the Royal Rumble, he of course doesn't win the Royal Rumble match. So if it wasn't Edge, who would have ended up winning the match? Chris Jericho had actually mentioned in one of his books that the original plan was for Batista to win the 2010 Royal Rumble match, and this is likely why Batista had ended up winning the WWE Championship from John Cena at Elimination Chamber the month after. If Batista had won the Royal Rumble match, this moment would have made more sense, as he would have cashed in his WrestleMania title opportunity early, something John Cena tried doing 2 years prior but was unsuccessful at walking out as champion, while Batista would have been successful at doing so, adding more depth into Batista's reasoning of claiming he's better than John Cena and should be the face of the company. After Batista and John Cena's match at SummerSlam 2008, it was rumored that the rematch would take place at WrestleMania 25. However, Batista would end up missing WrestleMania 25 due to recovering from surgery to heal a torn hamstring. So it seemed like it was always the plan to have John Cena versus Batista at WrestleMania 26 in some sort of way, whether a championship was involved or not. Elimination Chamber 2010. I still think we get that same World Heavyweight Championship Elimination Chamber match that had Chris Jericho, CM Punk, John Morrison, Rey Mysterio, R-Truth, and the champion Undertaker. And I honestly think that with the result of the match, everything would stay the same, as Chris Jericho would walk out as the World Heavyweight Champion. I debated on putting CM Punk as an option in this case, but not only was he the guy who Undertaker won the title off of back at Hell in a Cell 2009, but CM Punk already had multiple reigns as World Heavyweight Champion throughout 2009, so it seemed like it made more sense for Chris Jericho to be the one that walked out as champion regardless. WrestleMania 26. Now, of course, in the real timeline, we had Edge versus Chris Jericho because Edge made his return and won the Royal Rumble. But what would happen in this case if Chris Jericho is the World Heavyweight Champion, but it's not Edge that ends up facing him because he's still out recovering from the Achilles tendon injury? And that's why I think they would have actually had Christian go up against Chris Jericho at WrestleMania. In the real timeline, Christian would join the Raw roster after Elimination Chamber once ECW would end as a brand. But instead of going to Raw, he would go on to the SmackDown brand and challenge Chris Jericho for the World Heavyweight Championship at WrestleMania 26. Christian ended up going to SmackDown during the 2010 draft anyway, so I don't think it really makes too much of a difference in the timeline besides not being a part of the Money in the Bank ladder match at WrestleMania 26. Not only does this make sense due to Christian's friendship with Edge that can play into the storyline, but also tying back to the fact that Christian and Chris Jericho had previously faced each other at WrestleMania 20, a match that resulted in Christian picking up the victory over Chris Jericho. And just like the Edge and Chris Jericho match in the real timeline, we would still see two Canadians face off for the World Championship at WrestleMania. But this also means that Chris Jericho would end up retaining the World Heavyweight Championship in this match. If Edge didn't end up winning the match against Chris Jericho like we hoped would have happened, there's no way Vince McMahon would even consider having Christian win. And with Chris Jericho still being the champion here, this still means that Jack Swagger would end up winning the Money in the Bank ladder match and becoming the new World Heavyweight Champion when he cashes in the briefcase on the SmackDown after WrestleMania 26 on Chris Jericho. Extreme Rules 2010. I think we would get another match between Christian and Chris Jericho, but of course, no world champion because Jack Swagger had won the title by cashing in the briefcase. Because it's not the Edge and Chris Jericho rivalry at this point, then I don't think the Christian and Chris Jericho match would have the steel cage match stipulation like we had seen in the real timeline, so in this case, I think it would be simply an Extreme Rules match. And honestly, there's only one particular reason why I would have Christian and Chris Jericho face off against each other again here, and that is because at this event is where we finally see the return of Edge to help Christian either beat Chris Jericho during the match, or perhaps he helps Christian after losing to Chris Jericho and he's getting beaten down after the match. The recovery time for an Achilles tendon injury is usually between 9 and 12 months, and Extreme Rules would be the 9-month mark of this process. So if Edge didn't recover as fast as he did, this would mean he would indeed miss WrestleMania 26. Over the Limit 2010. To not risk Edge injuring himself on his first month back, the Edge-Chris Jericho match for Over the Limit would actually be in a tag team match. We would see the reuniting team of Edge and Christian for the first time since the Attitude Era against the reuniting team of Chris Jericho and The Big Show, also known as the Jera Show. At Extreme Rules, Show Miz had lost the Unified Tag Team Championships in a gauntlet match that would result in the end of the team, and Big Show would actually get sent from Raw to SmackDown as a part of the 2010 draft the night after Extreme Rules, which would line up perfectly. Speaking of the draft, this would mean that due to Edge and Jericho's rivalry kicking off here, that neither of them would be drafted from SmackDown to Monday Night Raw. Edge and Christian would end up pulling off the victory in this tag team match, and this would result in Big Show hitting Chris Jericho with a WMD and begin the babyface run he got at this time, but delayed by a few weeks due to this match happening. Fatal 4-Way 2010, I think we would get the Fatal 4-Way match where Jack Swagger defends the World Heavyweight Championship against CM Punk, Rey Mysterio, and the Rated R superstar Edge. In the real timeline, Big Show was a part of this match, but with what transpired at Over the Limit, Big Show would likely have a singles match with Chris Jericho at the event instead. Let's not forget that Undertaker originally qualified for this match but was replaced by Rey Mysterio due to the injury he suffered during the qualifying match. In this timeline, I think Edge would have actually been the one to win the World Heavyweight Championship in this match with the star power he has. Plus, being a babyface on SmackDown here, while in the real timeline, he was a heel on Monday Night Raw at that point. Money in the Bank 2010. Just like the real timeline, Jack Swagger would get his rematch for the World Heavyweight Championship, but with Edge instead of Rey Mysterio. And of course, after working a long match and retaining the World Heavyweight Championship, out comes Mr. Money in the Bank. Kane in the real timeline had done this when Rey Mysterio retained and ultimately became the new champion. However, in this timeline, Kane isn't the one that ends up winning the SmackDown Money in the Bank briefcase. I think it would end up being Chris Jericho, who would do that exact same thing, but cashing in on Edge and winning the World Heavyweight Championship once again, continuing their rivalry. Yes, I get that Kane's cash-in was so that they can set up the Undertaker-Kane feud we got over the summer, but did that feud really need the World Heavyweight Championship involved? I don't really think so. SummerSlam 2010. we would get Edge against Chris Jericho for the World Heavyweight Championship. Both Edge and Chris Jericho in the real timeline were a part of the Team WWE versus Team Nexus Elimination Tag Team match. But due to them being on the SmackDown brand in this timeline instead of Raw, they wouldn't be a part of that match because that was a Raw exclusive match. And to sum everything up, this would result in Edge winning back the World Heavyweight Championship from Chris Jericho and would set up for what I have planned for Night of Champions. We have opened up YouTube channel memberships. Now at the moment as this gets released, we only have one tier, which is only $1.99, which you get stuff like behind the scenes footage and photos, you get a shout out on every single episode of Pro Wrestling What If, and more importantly, you get early access 24 hours before anyone else does for every single episode of Pro Wrestling What If. We wanted to give a shout out to Jackson Weingard, Jada Sanchez, and Fox Starkiller for joining our YouTube channel membership. So definitely consider joining our YouTube channel membership. It'll be greatly appreciated, and hopefully there'll be enough people interested that we can open up more tiers, including eventually doing a tier with bonus content that you can't see otherwise. But let's get right back to the video. Night of Champions 2010. We would have Chris Jericho and Edge once again for the World Heavyweight Championship, but this time in a ladder match. This would be the final match of Edge and Chris Jericho's long rivalry, as this would not only be in a ladder match, but a special stipulation is placed where the loser would be forced to leave the WWE. This was a stipulation that was put on Chris Jericho in the real timeline during the WWE Championship Scramble match he was involved in. And just like in that match, Chris Jericho would lose and would be forced to leave WWE, allowing his contract with WWE to come to an end and tour with his band Fozzy once again. And Edge would likely continue to hold the World Heavyweight Championship at this point until the night after WrestleMania 27, where he would announce his retirement from professional wrestling, and at that point would be gone for the next 9 years.